Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Meher Baba program. I'm Fred Stankus, along with my special guest, Ed Flanagan. Good evening,
Hi,
Ed.
Fred. Nice to be with you again.
This is our second show.
Right.
Last week we did part one.
Mm-hmm.
Ed is a former missionary priest who left the Far East in the late 60s, is now a Meher Baba lover, and also he's a bioenergy healer, and he resides in Calabasas. Ed, let's get to the question that we more or less left off with at the end of last show is, when and how did you hear about Meher Baba?
Well, the first time, actually, I have to go back. I just thought of something. When I was about 11 years old, my sister came home from school one day. She was 6 years older than me. She said, "Oh, you know what I heard today? Is that Jesus was born again in India and is alive now." I thought, oh, isn't that something? And of course, I completely forgot about it and grew up. And then, after I'd left the priesthood, I had become a Madison Avenue television and film producer, and my boss was a guy named Bob Riga. He was very famous at ABC World of Sports. And he was Catholic, he knew I'd been a priest, and he walked in one day and he said, "Ed, what do you think of this Meher Baba?" And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Well, my son had been having a lot of problems in the last 10 years or so, and we'd kind of given up on this kid. And he just got back from India, and he is absolutely, utterly transformed, and we just cannot believe the change in him. And he claims that this Meher Baba is the return of Jesus." Well, I probably did an eye roll like that. You don't tell a Catholic priest that Jesus has come back again and lives in India now. Well, I knew he was sincere, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I just said, "Oh, Bob, he's probably one of those Indian gurus. I'm not really into that stuff, This was in the days of the Beatles going after Maharishi and Guru Maharaj this and this one and that one, whatever, and I wasn't into any of that stuff. And that was it. 6 months later, I'm with Oscar Ichazo. Oscar Ichazo was a Bolivian mystic who formed the Eureka Institute, where I had just completed a 40-day training that utterly changed my life. More than 13 years in the seminary ever did. And I remember at a large press conference, the first time we actually met Oscar, people asking, "Well, what about Muktananda and Maharishi this and Rajneesh that?" And he didn't have much to say about any of these gurus, And then somebody said, "Well, what about Meher Baba?" He said, Meher Baba is exactly who he says he was, the avatar of the age. Well, I had never heard the word avatar before. I did not know it was the Hindu word for the Christ. But I said, "Oh, that's the guy Bob Riga told me about, of the age, whatever that. Oh, it must be something important, And again, completely forgot it. Within a year, I was teaching for this Eureka Institute in London. And Pete Townsend used to come to our open houses. Pete Townsend of The Who. He really loved our school, and he really thought we had some really solid teachings and foundation. And he would come to our open houses. And one Friday, we got a call from him saying, "Okay, you guys, your turn to come to my open house now. This American woman named Ivy Deuce is going to be at my house next Friday evening, and we'd like you to come over and hear her talk." And I said, "Yeah, I'll go." So I went. And Pete met me at the door, shook his hand, walked in his living room, and in his living room is this huge photograph of Meher Baba on the wall, looking directly on camera into my heart. And I said, "Who the hell are you?" And I felt a presence and a compassion that I'd never experienced before, even looking into the real eyes of a living human being in front of me. And I kept thinking, who are you? Who are you? And then I was standing there looking at the photo, and Pete tapped me and he says, we're ready to start now. Oh, so we had to go back into the sunroom, and I heard this lady talk about Meher Baba, and all the while I'm thinking, I got to get out there and look at him again. And I started to conspire. I wonder if I asked Pete if I could have a copy of that photo. Maybe I can come back tomorrow afternoon and take a picture of it or something. But I really wanted to look at this guy, whoever he was. I still had no idea who Meher Baba was. It took me 2 more years. Now, during that talk, Ivy Du said she had just helped Baba edit his magnum opus, a book called God Speaks. So I went out and I bought God Speaks. Now, I have 4 or 5 degrees in theology and philosophy and everything. I started to read God Speaks, and after page 30, I closed it and I said, he obviously knows what he's talking about, but it's way beyond me. So I gave the book to one of my friends, a young Jewish lad, who he and his wife were very close to me. They were also my students at Eureka in London. And he read the book in 4 days and started to explain it to me. What a reduction. Ego reduction that was. So I never picked up God Speaks again until about 15 years ago. And when I picked it up, it was like butter on hot toast. It just went in so easily. And I totally was able to take it on a whole other level. So anyway, get back to 2 years later, I was back in New York without a job, had totally disgusted with film business, didn't want to do that, and had just crashed from a really, really, really terrible relationship. And was in deep, deep depression. And I remember walking through a bookstore in New York City, the East West bookstore on 6th Avenue and 13th Street. And this book came off the shelf, almost hit me on the head. I picked it up, Mastery of Consciousness, The Life and Teachings of Avatar Meher Baba by Alan Cohen. I said, oh, this is probably the medicine I need. I bought the book, took it home, and started reading it. And in the next 2 days, I started to really realize who Meher Baba was saying he really was. And this was a real shock to my Catholic theological priestly mind. He was Jesus, Zoroaster, Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad, and now Meher Baba, the same ancient one. This was a bit much for me. But then I started to realize, of course, all the religions, they're all one and the same. A little different emphasis each incarnation on the same teaching, love God and find Him as your own real self, right? So I can remember the actual afternoon. I was living on 22nd Street, New York. I remember the afternoon, the way the sun was coming in on the asparagus fern as I was sitting on my bed reading this book, laughing and crying at the same time, because what Baba showed me was that all my suffering was totally self-created. I was living in a dream, an illusion of my own making. So I was laughing and crying at the same time reading this book, and finally I said, by God, you are who you say you are. And from that moment, I never, ever, ever turned back, or never had even the slightest doubt of who Meher Baba is.
Didn't you look in the New York phone directory for the name Meher Baba?
The first thing I did, now here's how crazy you can be. First thing I did, I said, oh my God. I get out the New York City telephone directory and I look up Meher Baba as if I'm expecting to find Meher Baba listed, right? There are actually 2 listings. The Meher Baba Society, which is up in the Upper East Side, and the Meher Baba Baba House down on West 4th Street. Well, that was only a short, 20-minute bike ride from me. So I called that number, and there was a recording. It said, Meher Baba Center is open on Friday nights for movies and films and talks and tea and refreshments, 7:30. I said, this is a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I said, I'm not waiting until Friday night. I get on my bicycle with an umbrella. And I rode the 20 blocks down to West 4th Street, locked my bike up to a parking meter, went upstairs, stood in front of the door of the Meher Baba Center, and put my hand on the doorknob and slowly turned. And it was open.
It was open.
It was open.
was-
Somebody had forgotten to lock up
Oh,
the
my.
previous Friday night. I went in, I closed the door behind me, locked it, turned on the lights, and I had my first darshan with Baba. His hair, his sadra, his sandals, my first photograph of Baba that I'd never seen outside of the one in Pete Townsend's living room. And I spent the next 2 or 3 hours really being with Baba.
My God.
Yeah.
In this bookstore.
In this little,
And nobody came in.
and nobody came in. It was the Meher Baba Center that they had forgot to lock up the previous Friday night.
It was like
well, Baba turned the key. He knew I was coming, and he turned the key
wide
because he
open.
wanted to open his arms
God.
to me in that moment, you know.
And then,
And I went home that night, and I slept the best sleep I've ever had in my life.
wow.
All my worries and depression were gone.
And then you made contact with Mrs. Stokes, Graham Knight Stokes' wife.
Actually, when Baba came to New York, his seat of operations was a double townhouse in Greenwich Village on Grove Street, 88 and 90 Grove Street. And it was the home of Graham Phelps Stokes and his wife Lettice. Now, Graham Phelps Stokes was an amazing man. He owned the Bank of Nevada. He owned a railroad. He was... Samuel Gompers, he was Upton Sinclair, these were all his friends, Alice Bailey. So when he first met Meher Baba, he was totally overwhelmed by his love. And so he invited, when Baba came to America in 1931, he invited him to stay at his house and use his house as his seat of operations. He did, and when Baba came back in 1932, just before he came out to Hollywood, because he came out to spend 2 months in Hollywood, he said, "Come on, guys, let's get together and make a movie." Can you imagine God coming and saying, "Let's get together and make a movie about the creation, about reincarnation, and a real love story"? So before Baba spent his 2 months in Hollywood, he stayed several more days at the Stokes residence. And then when Baba came back again in 1935, again he stayed at the Stokes. So this house was vibrating with Meher Baba's...
You know, we have
presence.
some footage of that house and Baba's visit.
Oh.
Can we show some right now?
Oh, right. Well, Lettice used to tell me. She said, I became very friendly with her. What happened was I had heard... that she could not, she said at least 2 or 3 times a week, people would bang on her door, all hours of the day and night and say, "Is this the house where Meher Baba stayed?" And so for that reason, I never went near the house, even though I lived only 3 blocks away. I didn't want to bother the poor woman, you know. But one day, I was walking by the house with a friend, and about a half block away, I see this old woman bending over at the front door, trying to get the key in the hole. And I said, "Oh my God, that's the lady. That's Mrs. Stokes." I said, "Oh God, please, don't let her get the key in before I get there." And I ran, and I got there out of breath. I said, "Hi, Mrs. Stokes." I said, "Are you having trouble with the key?" She said, "Oh yeah, I forgot my glasses. Could you help me?" I said, "Absolutely." So I opened the door, and she said, "Oh," she said, "I haven't seen you in ages." She said, "Why don't you come by tomorrow for tea at 2:00? I said, "Oh, wonderful." And she went in, and I said, "Oh, thank you, Bow." Next day at 2:00, I arrive, and I ring the bell or knock on the door, whatever. She comes to the door, and she says, "Oh, but you're not Bill." I said, "No, my name is Ed." "Well, wasn't that you yesterday?" I said, "Yes." "Oh," she said, "I thought you were the boy next door who helps with my groceries sometimes." And she got a big car. Well, she said, "Well, you're here now. You might as well come in for the tea." So we went to the back garden. And we had tea. Now, she told me this was the garden that Baba was filmed in 1932. And you have that clip?
Yes, number 5. Timmy, can you show number 5? That's the clip of Meher Baba at this garden at Mrs. Stokes' house.
At Grove Street, 1932. Now, remember, Baba was silent.
I intend to bring together all religions,
This is different, but that's okay.
like beads on one string, and revitalize them for individual and collective needs. This is my mission to the West.
When they begin the beginning, it brings back a sound of music so tender.
That was a different cut. That was the 1932 Pate newsreel from England.
That was the one from England. We have one that was also filmed, but we won't show that now.
Yeah.
But we do have one that was filmed in her garden.
Right.
And for years, being a film producer, I had access to Sherman Grinberg and UPI and all the film vaults in New York. And I scoured every film vault in New York to find that newsreel, and we couldn't find it. And then one day, about 4 years later, we get a call. Oh, there he is. That's the garden.
That's the garden.
Yeah.
That's where you were.
I was the gardener in that garden in the late 70s.
That's in New York City.
That's Kaka. Meredith Starr. That's Meredith Starr. That's Kaka behind him. Quentin Todd and Adi Jr.
This is Sri Sadguru Meher Baba, who has been completely silent for 7 years. I will ask him a few questions, and he will reply by means of his alphabet board. What is your mission? To make others realize the truth in every phase of life, and to make brotherhood a practical fact. Why have you come especially to America? Because there is greater energy in America than elsewhere, but most of this energy is misdirected. I will divert it into creative and spiritual channels. What will happen when you break your silence? To whom I speak will be instantaneously convinced of the truth. I want one more repetition.
Now, people, not too many people realize this, but when the avatar does something on a small scale, he's really working universally. So Baba, using the alphabet board in the mid-1920s and 30s and 40s, was ushering in, I believe, the age of the internet. We all sit there with little alphabet boards all day long, talking to each other all over the world instantaneously.
Amazing.
Yes.
Could be.
So this was the ushering in of the age of the internet.
Yeah, so you then, finding out about Baba, you then make plans to visit India. Yeah,
I said, okay, now's the time to go and bow down. But I gotta back up. When Lateef Stokes let me go up into the little room.
In that home. Where Baba used to give his darshan to so many hundreds of people in New York. That is where I first bowed down to Baba. His chair was there. And I can remember feeling, of all the people in New York City, I am the luckiest.
I really deeply felt that. The feeling of his presence in that room was so strong. It was the same feeling I felt at his home in Myrtle Beach, the same feeling I felt at the cave in Assisi, where he did special work in 1933, a seclusion that he said planned the next 2,000 years of human history. And the same feeling you get when you go into his tomb and you bow your head down on that marble. It's the feeling of your own presence, the way you have never experienced it before.
And I was in that room.
That room was the
Stokes
first
house.
time I felt it. Yeah.
But I understand that you then went through some well, you were upset when I guess Mrs. Stokes passed away, and the house was basically not sold.
What happened, when I walked into that house the first time, it was like a hot movie set from the early 30s. Not the 40s, the early 30s. Everything had crystallized. Nothing had changed. It was like amazing. As in the film business, you talk about a hot set. Is camera ready for the next scene, right? This was a hot set from 1932. And when she died, for some reason, the house didn't get sold, and it fell into disrepair. And I would go by, I was living in Boston then, and I would come down every few months on business trips from Boston. And each time I came down and walked by that house, it looked worse and worse and worse. Water pipes broke, ceilings were coming down. It was the house with nobody in it, and it broke my heart.
And so it was at a point to where
And then finally one day I come down and I see a work light in there and some plasterers and electricians working, and said, oh my God, something's going on with the house. So I went in and they said, oh yeah, the house has been bought by an artist and his family, and they're fixing it up and restoring it as it was in the 30s.
Oh my.
Oh, wow. So he said, well, they're not here now, but they'll be back later. So later on I went, and just as I got there, the man, the artist, and his wife and his two children were dashing out the door into a cab. And I said, wait. I said, you the new owner? He said, yeah. I says, listen, I used to be the gardener here for 4 years. I says, you have no idea what a treasure you have. He says, well, we know we've got something great, but we don't know what it is. We just feel it. He said, can you come back later this evening? And I said, I'll be back at 6 o'clock. So I went back, I walked into the house, and who was there but Lettice Stokes' nephew, whom I had met 15 years earlier, only once, with her in that house. And he confirmed to the new owners how much she loved me and thought of me. And so that became my connection to the new owners, which I have to this day.
Wow.
And they have invited the Baba community in New York back several times to have tea and to meet in that beautiful back garden where I used to be gardener and where Baba was filmed, where you just saw on the film.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So then you pursued to go to India via Italy.
Yes.
You stopped at Assisi, and it was a cold, I think, icy, snowy weather.
The night I had planned to do some prayer and seclusion up in the cave, the hidden cave. I had a map of where the cave was, drawn for me by Pete Townsend, who had just made a movie of that area in the cave, and so the nuns, I was staying at a convent overnight, and I woke up and it was the first snowfall of the season. Solid ice. The mile road up to the Caccieri, the monastery at the top of the mountain, was solid ice. And I said, it's going to take me 2 or 3 hours to walk up there, a couple of hours to come down. By the time I get up there, it'll be time to come back. I said, well, this is a pilgrimage. So I get on with my backpack, and I start climbing the Caccieri Road in the ice. And within about 5 minutes, this little Volkswagen pulls up with the snow chains on it, and these two monks in it start talking in Italian, but my Spanish, I can understand. They say, you going up the Caccieri? Hop in, we'll bring you up.
And so they brought you up.
Bobby, you sent your agents to help me.
And then you went to St. Francis of Assisi's cave, where he spent time when he was on Earth.
Yes.
And Meher Baba went there in 1933. So you
Baba loved Francis of Assisi. He says Francis of Assisi was not a saint. He was a totally God-realized perfect master.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So you spent time in the cave, and then after that you went on to Greece. You stopped briefly.
I went to Rome, and I went to Greece.
You went to
I
the
went
Acropolis.
to Assisi. I went to Venice. I visited all the places where Baba had been. I was actually tracing his path on my way to finally bow down to him in India.
And then it's so interesting, when you arrived in India, you arrived, you went to Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka you inquired about going to Bombay or to Ahmednagar, and they said that it'd be difficult to get a flight there.
Well, it was Christmas time, and there were no more flights.
And we only have 2 minutes, so let's see if we can get as much as we can in.
Okay, so what they did is they finally, they flew me to Madras. I took a 3-day second-class rail ticket across India. That was a trip in itself. And I finally arrived at Baba's. And when you are climbing that hill for the first time, what you know is you're on your way to your destiny to bow down to God in human form. I cannot tell you what goes through your heart after making that 10 or 14,000 mile journey, right? And finally, I crossed the threshold and I bowed down my head to the Lord. And the feeling was, welcome home. And that was the first day of 3 months that I would spend in India on that trip, and spent a lot of time in that tomb with Baba.
And you had a good relationship with close disciples of Meher Baba.
All his intimate disciples.
Amani Baba's sister, Erich.
His sister, his 2 brothers, Erich, all the living mandali that were there then. I did massage on most of them, you know. And it was an extraordinary experience. And most importantly, I got to know and really love Baba's dearest woman disciple, Mera Irani. Baba said, Mera is the only human being who loves me as I truly ought to be loved.
And that's right. You got to meet her and also spend some intimate time when she was at the water tank house, or the fort
Yes.
that was at Upper Meherabad.
At Upper Meherabad, beside the tomb.
Yeah, and the women would go in there just to sort of like
Freshen up. They used to live there in the 30s, you
Yes.
know. So when they'd come up to visit the tomb, they'd go in there for a few minutes and freshen up, you know.
And you got to meet her.
And I got to meet her there, and I thought all the women had left to go to the tomb, and I bent down, and there she was.
Wow.
And she called me in and spent some time, intimate time with me there.
It's wonderful. And it looks like they're rolling the credits.